Greetings again. My name is Jesse Ledesma. I do these video essays for psychology here from El Paso, Texas. It is approximately 12:49 in the afternoon, and the reason behind is to help people to deal with life. And though you may have seen this on a different video, excuse me, I have to excuse me, just do a little administrative. Okay, tell you that it's not the same. The one that I did before is trying to give people an idea of how we develop as an individual and the processes more or less that contribute to our nature, our makeup. This is how you would go about, at least how I would go about evaluating a person uh, as far as whether they're an individual in trouble, they're an individual going through a crisis, or they're an individual in dire need of assistance. And of course, I've already said that the primary for me is biology because we are a biological organism. And even though we expect things to get to be correct through our development, our physical growth, sometimes it's not. And I think that many times we make the error of looking at somebody and saying that person looks like me, therefore that person has to be like me. The reality is no, that the biology, the brain structures, the brain cells, the neurotransmitters, the hormones, the pituitary glands, the different hormone releasing organs um, can interfere or not be exactly the way they did not develop to the point that they should have developed. So that would be my beginning. The next thing that I look at is social relationships, which falls under psychology. Interpersonal relationships, which falls under social psychology. And the reason being is that you have an individual, whether they have a good biological nature or a bad biological nature, they're still going to interact with people. The primary people that a small little baby is going to interact with is going to be the parent. Now, when you talk to somebody, you get a sense of what they're going through when they tell you how the relationships between their friends, their family, and their co-workers and other individuals they run into on a day-to-day basis. Excuse me. So good friendships, good romantic relationships, good relationships with brothers and sisters and parents gives you an idea of a healthy person, whereas where you have conflict gives you an idea of an unhealthy person. And that's how I determine things. That's how I deal with things. I either put them on a healthy spectrum, at the healthy end of the spectrum, or I put them on the unhealthy end of the spectrum. Now, you started as a biological organism. You're basically just you're just a baby that hears, that sees, that smells, that tastes, that touches, and you adapt, reactions to your environment, and that's through your social interaction with your parents and other individuals. And then you start developing what is called a mood or emotions, emotive, there's another word for it, but emotional psychology, dealing with emotions. And you can, at this early age, because of the inappropriate relationships, the inappropriate social psychology that you were affected to, that you were, I'll get the word later, you start to develop a mood, an emotional nature. Okay. And then you start entering into what I call the spectrum of Freudian psychology. So you're speaking to a person, you want to see the response time, their interaction, um, their ability to identify and to recognize things as a rational person should be able to recognize them. You ask the question, have you ever been, diagnosed with any, medical complications? Okay. And then, of course, you need to talk to the person about the relationships they have their social psychology part of their person, this really will get you to understand a person a lot, excuse me, by the emotions that they tell you that they express on a day-to-day basis. Whether they feel agitated when they wake up, anxious, or they feel sad, depressed, you learn a lot. And then eventually you're going to be dealing with an adult. Most of the time when you're talking with people in mental health, you'll deal with adults unless your interest in mental health is children, adolescents, teens, or you're into school psychology, which I personally, yeah, school psych. There is no such thing as understanding a person uh, utilizing the theory of school psychology. A school psychologist, a psychologist that works in school, a counselor that works in school. Okay, but Freud said that well, Freud said a lot, you know, and a lot of what he said, people have criticized. But what I'm talking about here with Freudian psychology is you start entering into the reality that as a child, this person you're talking to uh, developed some serious psychological problems. That's abnormal psychology right there. So you've evaluated the person on a biological spectrum. You've seen whether the person is physically healthy. You talk to the individual about their relationships, and you've seen what the nature of the relationships are. Are they healthy or are they unhealthy? You talk to the person about their emotions. Are they normal emotions for the time? That's what makes an emotion normal. Is it appropriate for what's going on in the person's life? Depression is appropriate for what's going on in a person's life if that person is experiencing severe amount of stress. Okay. Um, Overwhelming emotion when something really isn't going on, it is something that is due to something else. But the point being that when you start talking about real illness, most of the time, that's the point I want to make. It happens at an early age, and that's what part of Freudian psychology is. That a lot of what we are as adults uh, is a response to the traumas that we faced as children. And then you have abnormal psychology, which is dealing with actual psychological illness. I'm surprised how many professionals think that there isn't, you know, uh, degrees of depression or degrees of anxiety. And I know that there are people who I would not say, well, that person suffers from bipolar or that person suffers from, let me see here, generalized anxiety or panic attacks or some other, they just happen to have the symptoms of generalized anxiety because of the current stress. And the current stress can be managed to where the person will stop behaving like a person who has generalized anxiety. But there are people who, for the lifetime, will be a person with major depression, or a person with mania and depression, or a person with psychosis, loss of reality, and that is their life experience. Okay. Now you go through the first five, and you get into behaviorism, because behaviorism to me is about forming habits through learning and memory. You're interacting with your environment, you're acquiring information, you're developing attitudes, you're developing moods, you're learning, and you're storing that learning in your memory. So and the way that we get to, excuse me, trying to drink so I don't cough that much. Coca-Cola, nothing big. But to me, for me, or in my opinion, however you want to state it, behavior matters. Uh, I know there are people who can separate behavior from a person's moral and ethical nature. I can't. Behavior tells me a lot about a person. Behavior tells me whether they're suffering from a verifiable psychological illness, Behavior tells me whether their illness is a manifestation of something that happened to them in an early age that is now appearing as an adult. Behavior tells me a lot about the emotions of a person, whether they're anxious or depressed. Behavior tells me how they interact in a social environment. Is it a healthy interaction or unhealthy interaction? And behavior tells me if the person could be suffering from some kind of biological deficiency. Whether some of the structures in the brain didn't develop the way they should have developed. And at the end here, see, when I look at someone, oh, I forgot one. Oh man, okay. So let me look at my here. Okay, so your biological organism interacting in a social in relationships, and you start developing emotions. Okay, right here. Hold on here. I'm gonna put it in, and I'm gonna have to change the numbers. That's okay because this is a teaching tool, anyways. That will be for, okay, cognitive psychology. That is a big one also. How do you spell cognitive? Okay, psychology. Then I can change this. Hold on, I can leave as is, change it to that, change it to this to 6, and this to 7. Okay, now this is what I consider to be a total person right there. Right there's a total person to me. Got to understand the biology of the person. To understand a total person, you got to understand the biology of a person. You got to understand how they deal with social, interpersonal relationships, with the social psychology. You got to understand the emotions of a person. This is the one I left out. Cognitive psychology is about thinking. And thinking to me is very important because, and I'm going to write it in here just to stress the point. I've said that in life, to have a major change, we need to adapt. Okay, learn to spell. We need to adapt a new attitude. And I have said that new attitude should be a positive attitude. Okay. And this really does control a lot. I've also said that thoughts, which cognitive psychology is basically information processing. The human beings, the way the human person processes information, the way they think. Okay. And the way we think is relative to our emotions. Okay. So the total person for me, okay, again, start with the biology of the person, their interpersonal relationships, their emotions. And I'm looking at my board here, okay, which I have it in front of me. I can look it over here, okay. But then I have to move this. The way they think, you go from emotions to the way they think. Okay, has something started to develop? A true psychological illness started to develop because of these factors up here, okay? Because of these factors right here, okay? Has something developed because of these factors, okay? Let me see here. Something has developed that is the result of early childhood trauma. When I talk about Freudian psychology, I'm only using the part of Freudian psychology that deals with adult manifestations of early childhood trauma. What is it that developed? Generalized anxiety, major depression, manic depressive. What developed here? Uh, um, a devious person, a person of fraud, a manipulator, a narcissist. What happened here? This is actual true mental health illness right here. Okay, and then the behavior. Uh, just going to add this to the notes. Let's take a case as Jared Lee Loughner, which is the individual that shot the 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 American representative, congressional representative in Tucson, Arizona, among the other people that he shot, and he took that little girl's life. Okay, um, where would I put it if I went through every single one of these? And I did. I did my own evaluation. I did not think the man had any biological or neurological problems. As far as his social interpersonal relationships, he appeared to be able to make friends, not have distressful, chaotic relationships with his parents, even though other things have been reported to me, nothing significant in the social or the interpersonal relationships in his social psychology. The emotions. Ironically, I didn't see great emotion on this individual. They reported the person was an agitated, angry person. They even displayed a picture where the person just, he's shaved head and he's got this strange psychotic look on his face. In the news medium, I saw the video that they claimed he did at the university, that they claimed he said some very irrational things. I did not see an irrational person. In fact, I was surprised how nice he was, and the language that he used did not sound like the language of what I would call a foaming at the mouth lunatic. Okay, right here, cognitive psychology. The attitudes he had were very distinct attitudes. There are people in our society who develop this attitude of superiority. They're just better than you and I. That's what they convince themselves of. They're better than you and I. And then they get to the point where they're super better than you and I. And then they get frustrated because everything in their life doesn't reinforce the idea. When they have an interaction with a police officer, when they have an interaction with a professor or an instructor at a college or university, when they have an interaction with a normal, regular person, it doesn't reinforce this idea, and that causes frustration. And what they need to do is they need to, emphatically prove that they are superior. And that's what I called that was my evaluation of Mr. Jerry Lee Loughner, is that he had developed a philosophy, a sort of a Superman idea or a godly idea of himself. And when that didn't, manifest itself, when it wasn't reinforced in society, when he was flunking out, when people were reacting to him like he was a lunatic and his ideas were crazy ideas, then came the need to prove that he was superior. That's in early childhood trauma. I also said that it appeared that the individual was not, if I remember correctly, was not suffering from early childhood trauma manifesting itself as an adult. But his abnormal psychology was psychosis, because his belief system, his belief that he is superior to everybody else, is not based in reality. And psychosis is the basic definition of psychosis is a loss of touch with reality. So that's what I placed him as, a psychotic with a superiority complex. Okay. And the behavior, what did the person do? As far as that's what I was going to put here. Okay, good, I caught myself. Forensic, forensic psychology. Let's say, for example, Mr. Jerry Lee Loughner had been killed and he was no longer available for interviews. And he isn't available for interviews because he's not cooperating. As far as I know, he's not cooperating with the psychologists that are interviewing him and working with him. Well, that's where forensic psychology comes in. You basically evaluate behavior, and by evaluating behavior, you try to see, did he have any illness? Was it a manifestation, something that manifests itself at an early age, that happened because of trauma at an early age? Was it related to the way the individual thought? Was it related to emotions? Was it related to proper emotions or improper emotions? Was it related to social interaction? And was it related to an individual's biology? And all of this, more or less, we can acquire because, we can look at a person's medical record. We can talk to person's friends. Those friends will tell us about what kind of emotions the individual had. Those friends will tell us about attitudes, philosophies, ideas that person will have. There may be a mental health record that will let us know, a social service record that will let us know if something happened to the individual as a child that would have led to an adult complication. There also may be a record of actual, true, verifiable psychological illness. And then, and through all of this, we're evaluating behavior. And since we don't have the person to interview, to speak to, and most of the time you'll have the person in front of you and you'll be able to interview them, but that person's a hustler, a schemer, a manipulator. Most people with true psychological illness are manipulators, schemers, hustlers. They're looking to work the system. They're looking to work you under certain environments. Looking for you to drop your guard so they can kill you. Don't ever expect too much of the people you're working with if you end up working in a facility. And again, behavior usually tells you. Okay, so all of this is an evaluation of a person. And I write a sentence or two under each. Under biology, I may write a sentence like, I was not able to acquire any information um, that leads me to think that the person had problems with his the person had medical problems. Then I write a sentence here. From the little information or from the information available, it appeared that the individual had appropriate interpersonal relationships or had inappropriate interpersonal relationships. Jerry Lee Loughner did not, in my opinion, didn't have inappropriate social relationships. I mean, to me, he was like everybody else that belongs to that culture, that person, the culture that does drugs, conspiracy theorists, and they're always talking themselves up, and they're always considering themselves Superman. There's that culture that exists, and to me, that there wasn't any inappropriate social interaction. So that would have been the sentence there. Emotions, I saw no inappropriate emotions. I mean, he does what he does, and he has no remorse. That's an inappropriate, but that's after the fact. Having committed the crime that he committed and not having remorse, guilt, shame, embarrassment is an inappropriate emotion, but that's after the fact. Emotions related to his social personal relationships or just about moods about life, I didn't see any inappropriate moods. And again, I'm writing sentences under each one of these. Cognitive psychology was big right here because he had a very distinct philosophy, and I got to be careful here because his philosophy was not the language or rhetoric of a foaming at the mouth lunatic. And I can use that language. I have no problem using that language. And there's a lot of people. I saw the news reports. I was watching Fox News, and I was surprised that somebody who was a let me see here, got to highlight it just to reinforce it. A forensic psychologist was talking about schizophrenia. I got to do a lecture on schizophrenia. And I'll just, it falls under abnormal psychology. There isn't a schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is a title for, I'm going to say 6 to 7 different types of behavioral groups, symptoms, patterns, uh, symptom pathology, excuse me. And you have, you know, visual and auditory hallucinations. You have repetitious behavior. You have, what appears to be dementia, just erratic thoughts, and you just have a different category. And schizophrenia is a title where 6, 7 subtitles fall under. And I was surprised that when this forensic psychologist was talking about Jerry Lee Loughner, he quickly went to schizophrenia as trying to, make the case that this person was a foaming at the mouth lunatic, and to me he wasn't. And I apologize to the people who have been labeled schizophrenic and have just heard me use that kind of adjectives. Uh, he was clear in his thinking, in my opinion. I wrote a paragraph here because this was to me the major deal that Jerry Lee Loughner had a philosophy where he considered himself superior to everybody else. Jerry Lee Loughner uh, um, Jerry Lee Loughner's philosophy was contradicted by his interactions with people in society, and that contradiction led to a stress and a conflict that Jerry Lee Loughner needed to resolve through the behavior that he ended up committing. There are people right now out in the world who think that they're smarter and just more valuable than anybody else. If you have an opportunity on National Geographic has a program about prison life. I forget the name of the program. And even though it's recorded and edited, and they want to sell the product, so they want to get a little uh, attention by how they package the product. You do get to see individuals, and you get to see their cunning, their deviousness, their manipulative nature, and how dangerous they can be. And it gives you an idea to what everybody calls is criminal psychology. And I didn't put it here because it isn't criminal psychology just about the psychology of criminals. It isn't a theory of human psychology. Okay, but you can go through all of these, and you're going to find right here cognitive psychology. Most criminals have an attitude, a superiority. Most drug addicts have a superiority complex. They think they're smarter than everybody else. That they don't have to listen to anybody else. And when that gets questioned, you know, when they're having to confront the reality that they're not as smart as they think they are, then you have bad behaviors. Okay, so now in the effort of adapt a new attitude and let that be a positive attitude, how does all of this come in come into play? Okay, well, one, your behavior, right? If you've been diagnosed with a verifiable psychological illness. You may know if you had early childhood trauma that is now manifesting itself as an adult. You definitely are aware of your ideas, your attitudes, your philosophies. There's no way you can't be. You're aware of your emotions. Okay? You're aware of the interpersonal relationships that you have, and by all means, you should be aware of your own personal biology. And I say all of this because I think that this is important. Adapting a new attitude, which should be a positive attitude, as a way of changing your nature if you have problems. Okay. But I did want to, I was reading some textbooks because sometimes when I'm bored, that's what I do. And I said, well, as long as I'm going to do this with psychology, then I should really make it about psychology and not just my own personal theory of human psychology. But again, as I'm closing here, I got to say, we have the ability to change. We have the ability to live a good life. We have the ability to take the steps towards living a good life. We have a way of challenging ourselves to manage our emotions. And we can manage our emotions by, where did I leave it? By changing our attitude, okay? Developing a more healthier, realistic, positive, more, if you want, I'm going to go ahead and say it, a more beautiful perspective of life where we value ourselves as an individual, and we start working for ourselves, by taking control of our lives. And the reality is, if there was something that happened when we were little children, it's understandable that we're going to have some kind of psychological illness. But I've told people before, never say I'm a manic depressive. Always say I'm a person with bipolar disorder or manic depressive. It's only a component of you. It isn't all of you. Okay? And by all means, what really gets us in trouble here is behavior. When all of these elements, contribute to behavior, the people we date, the jobs we take, how we manage our money, how we feel, and what we do when we feel that way. Do we go to alcohol or drugs or some other kind of, uh, you know, um, pleasurable experience to try to get away from the pain? Okay. And that's another dynamic. I should do a whole essay on the dynamic between pleasure and pain. However, my first goal was just to show an example of how I would evaluate a person. And at the end, I would say here, at the end, the conclusion, it would be in conclusion, subject A is an individual with superiority complex, okay, who has violent aggressive tendencies, okay, And well, on that particular case, that would be it. Now, if there's some other stuff, like subject A is an individual who has been diagnosed, with a particular neurological disorder, is struggling in interpersonal relationships, and has a lot of angst and pain and sadness and frustration. Some of it has to do with the view of life that they have. It is evident that the relationship between the child and the parent has resulted in the trauma that the person is experiencing as an adult. Right now, coming in here, I would say that the individual, subject A, has been diagnosed with, either schizophrenia, disorganized schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia, one of the schizophrenias, and the behaviors of the individual that are troubling are A, B, C, and D. And that would be my total evaluation of the person. And in my opinion, that's how you do a true psychological evaluation. Excuse me. And there are people who would stick here and they would do their evaluation based just on philosophy. There were people who would stay here and just do their evaluation on social psychology. Any one of these different things. Me, I put it all in. Um, I do speak a lot about stress management. Is there stress psychology? Well, all of this is stress. You know, a bad thought is going to lead to stress. If you lust after a woman and 20 years of your life you've been told not to do it, you're going to have stress. So all of this is about stress. Either you're at a good end of the spectrum, or you're at the end of the spectrum where you're experiencing stress. All these, let me see here, 7 points, 7 different layers of human nature will combine and will be responsible for the nature of the individual. Thank you for listening, and I wish you well.